recording. And turn it over to Zach. Yes, please use the mic. And the mic is working. Yay. Okay.
Good morning, and thank you to Melissa for being our technical expert and so many other things.
Actually, Rob Tyler is
Rob
technical
Tyler,
expert, not me.
And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Justin Orlando Fair, our speaker today. And he's a Baltimore native who works by day with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development and the Rural Counties Small Cities Program. Recently got his master's in city and regional planning in Morgan State. In his off time, he has several off times, so you're going to hear about many things he does, fitting more into 24 hours than most of us do into 8. He's a vice president of Unmatched Athlete, a nonprofit that plans pickup games for LGBTQ plus youth sports across the Baltimore DC corridor. And if that isn't too much to do, he also serves as board chair with Mission Fit, which is a nonprofit that uses training and exercise to empower Baltimore's youth to achieve health, belonging, and success. So obviously he is a man of many hats, and today we see many sweaters. Justin is a self-proclaimed know-it-all who immediately files everything away, including where he put his glasses. By night, he dreams of becoming a bodyweight warrior and is a proud housing advocate and visual artist under the name Soul Strong. Justin is passionate and excited to overlay his interests of community development, fitness, and the arts with being mindful and building family. He's going to speak to us today about how Jews in color use spirituality to combat racism, anti-Semitism, and other societal ills. So thank you very much, Justin Fair.
Thank you, Zachary. I'm stealing a chair.
Oh, sorry.
You're all
Thank
getting
you.
a fireside chat version for today. Good morning. On the second page of Black, White, and Jewish, do you have that book in front of you? Feel free to raise it up. Lisa, there you go. Rebecca Walker writes, "We are talking about God, I think, and memory." She then describes how when her friend leaves the moment, perhaps this lifetime, it will not be all perfectly articulated platitudes or carefully constructed diagnoses. It will be my heart, lazy, slow, decidedly not smart, that will pull and yearn and twist around like a dog in dirt. My heart will have registered the deeper meaning, snaking and elusive between her desperate pieces. My heart alone will allow me to remember her whole. I myself am a thinker and I'm a talker. So I'm going to speak today from personal experience. While verbose, I'm not an encyclopedia, so I hope today's lecture and discussion is as thought-provoking and resonant for you as preparing it has been for me. I did not bring informative slides, so instead I ask that you either grab a pen or sit back. There are books on your table. If you are captivated, feel free to thumb through them, hop between the tables if you like. They are randomly dispersed. You can borrow one if you ask nicely. This is my first time public speaking in a while. So in addition to it being morning and we're all still waking up, since I do a fatigue, raise a hand if you're like, Justin, I don't know what you're saying, where you're going with this. So I will be talking for about 20, 30 minutes, I think. That sounds like an impressive feat. I'll be talking on various subjects, including some nasty subjects like microaggressions, miscommunication, questioning yourself and the world, thoughtlessness, prejudice, and trying to forgive yourself for these very human and very hurtful choices. It's heavy stuff. The proper title of my lecture today is Lifting What's Heavy. So I like a good pun. So please sync with me for a bit and let me weave a few of these points together with a short lecture, some textual sources, and then a group discussion. I ask that you feel free to snap your fingers if anything resonates with you, and raise a hand if you're confused. Since Purim is coming up this Saturday, I did don this happy sweater. Happy Hanukkah, happy Purim. We didn't die holiday, so I asked that we live. And in the spirit of Yom Kippur, just like a Purim, let's repent. Let's have this be a time for voicing our concerns to ourselves, to the universe, and to those who come to mind. I'd also like to specifically thank my friends and my family who encouraged me to speak on these subjects. my husband, Olam Rale, my brother, Cantor David Fair, Kohenet Harriet Wims, Keshawn Johnson, Lysandra Hart. I also want to thank the Jedi Learning Circle that's run by Rabbi Isaiah Rothstein at the Jewish Federations. And of course, Zachary and Melissa for your encouragement. Okay, let's dig in. So I'd like to define a few things for you today. Spirituality, anti-Semitism, racism, these are all heavy subjects, and how I have seen various Jews of color deal with them, and sort of my recommendations for fighting what is a caste system in our country. That means 3 pillars that we find are pillars of strength in ethnic minority communities in our country. But because we are Jews, and in my case also Black, they are guilt, summoning intergenerational trauma, fun, and building hope. So on guilt, we survived. We are still alive today. What's our responsibility to others and to ourselves? To be spiritual, then, is to recognize a feeling or a sense that there is a bigger, greater presence and purpose in our lives. More than being a flesh and blood thinker, but that there is rather something cosmic. We as Jews task ourselves with questions, and sometimes these questions net answers, sometimes 2 or 3 more answers, depending on who you ask. But why do we ask? Why do we remember? Why do we feel a burden to be here and to participate? I would argue it's for us to look ahead and to fix what's broken. We know this as Tikkun Olam. Rabbi Telushkin, that yellow mustard book there, has a book of Jewish values. On day 116, the title is Acts of Kindness Looking Ahead. Telushkin writes that anyone who wishes to lead an ethical life must first engage in regular introspection. Therefore, we pray. He writes, these are the precepts for which a person is rewarded in this world and the world to come. We must honor our father and our mother, perform deeds of kindness, provide hospitality to guests, accompany the dead to the grave, concentrate on the meaning of prayers, and bring peace between fellow men, for the study of Torah is equal to them all. There's a longer list. I saved you a few. These all deal with the duty to fix our world. That is why we are guilty. That's why Jews are known as people of, next to Catholics, as Jewish guilt. We want to fix ourselves. I myself define myself through an identity framework. I'm a fixer. I'm a planner, even if my husband says I need work. I am also mixed. I'm Black, white, and Jewish. I'm gay. I'm a son. I am an artist, a stoic, an athlete. We all have titles that we use to describe ourselves. So if those titles give us comfort, it makes sense that we want to live with a sense of comfort and security, yes? I posit that we feel guilt because we know that this world is not just, and because it's not just, we have to work to fix it, but it's such a big fix. If I give too much of myself away, if I give away too much of my income to help a cause or to give to someone, in a way, aren't I harming myself? That defense ends up taking precedence, and we lose the forest for the trees. On intergenerational trauma, I'd like to cite David Ben Moshe with his myth of monocausal disparities. I too can be verbose, so can he, so pause with me. Ben Moshe is an Israeli-based writer and speaker and a fitness coach, and he wrote extensively about the law of return. As a self-described Black convert to Judaism with a criminal record, he was denied Israeli citizenship until just this January. I heard him talk on the Pardes podcast, and on another podcast, he spoke of ideological battles, campaigns that don't actually deal with oppressed people in need of help, that causes an us versus them mentality. That way of looking at the world, I think, is why the topic of being a Jew, but also being a Jew of color, is so resonant. We are posturing with ideas sometimes rather than trying to fix the world around us. It's easier to think than it is to do. And I think the answer to that is critical thinking. If there are context problems that are multifactorial, then sometimes we make excuses that ruin other people's lives that we necessarily try to help them. I think that this is a very much a white supremacist framework. How can I make a system that obscures the issue rather than fixes it? And usually that's due to a desire to other in them rather than us. Ben Moshe writes that it's an inability to hide your identity and your face, just to move forward in life. If being Black means to question, then you have to own and reclaim your culture. We must overcome an amnesia that cuts off your psychological root, that forces you to start over again and again and again against an ever-present traumatic hate campaign. We know this as institutionalized pain, as policing, as corrections, as slavery. My parents were both correctional officers, and I always found it ironic that my parents, of all people, could also uphold and work within the correction system, because my mother would often state she felt like she was trying to correct, other people were just trying to imprison. It's not this inability to hide your face present in our lives as Jews. For Jews of Ashkenazi descent, who are granted our country's blessing of whiteness, our congregation especially lives in a complement yet contradiction. For we live in a credo of Torah in a country that is more of a melting pot than a chopped salad. We fight to overcome systemic issues. Theoretically, yet for many, we honor our safety by protecting intergenerational wealth. That also upholds, I think, an institutional framework that is very much about whiteness rather than about truly helping people. A good example of this is the neighborhood you live in. Raise your hand if you know if your parents moved to your neighborhood. Raise your hand if your parents moved to your neighborhood. Raise your hand if you know where your parents lived before where you grew up. Great, thank you. I find that often it is that people move to a neighborhood because of that neighborhood's benefits and not because of the pains of another neighborhood. Yet often it's the pain that says, oh, I think we should move. The challenge is amnesia. I argue it's our obligation to leverage the power we gain. To do that is usually to hold frameworks close to your heart. So I told you earlier that I identify as a mix, Black, white, and Jewish. It's my joy of being mixed that often allows me to sort of see the world in a critical lens, because I'm often sort of in one foot and in one foot out, depending on whatever the subject is. I was actually in a play called Am I Black Enough Yet? The answer was yes. There's a bookmark in one of these books. You'll get a chocolate if you can find it. It's a good bookmark. I really enjoyed that play. I hold that framework close to my heart because it reminds me often of the sacrifices of those who came before me. From my mother's white side, my courtesy of Nassau, Long Island side, I go out of my way now to shop locally on Monument Main Street over in Northeast, or East, right beside Northeast Market. Really great marketplace. I shop there because I regularly recall that my grandfather and my uncle in Hicksville, New York, owned a family clothing and surplus goods store, which closed after 71 years in the early 2000s. I hold on to that line of memory and I adapt it to today by shopping locally. That is a framework that I employ. I ask that we each sort of hold those types of choices close to our heart and say like, yes, this is how I identify, because it matters to you. What is spirituality if not finding things that matter to you and trying to heal yourself through those things you hold close? I love to use the term forming a cultural magnetic resonance in your day. So if you are an earth, if you are the world, then you are looking to always find where you resonate, who you resonate with, what you resonate with. The best way to do that, I find, is to see and experience an independent love of your own skin, of your family's memories, and your ownership of your voice. These can be heavy topics, and not everyone identifies with heavy topics. But I find it's a matter of your safety and security. And if you don't make those things close to you, then you don't always have an obligation, because it's easier just to compartmentalize and push them aside. All right, so I've said a bunch. I wanted to cite a few more sources. I was recently on a cohort call for the Jewish Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, JEDI cohort that I mentioned earlier. And there was a speaker who wrote in one of the texts named Paula Pretlow. She wrote a responsibility that I felt it was my responsibility, which I gladly accept, given the privilege I've acquired and my ability to communicate with people from all walks of life and across diverse backgrounds. Thus, I choose Judaism. Haven't we all felt that sense of responsibility? One of the gifts I cherish as a Jew of color myself is to empathize with those who've converted into the religion, because they too understand how it feels to be an outsider in the system that, when she passed the veil, should welcome you. I relate, as Rebecca Walker wrote of her own aunt and uncle's household, interfaith household. There's a kind of harmonious discord in their house, a bicultural theme that feels familiar. I think that's one of the joys of choosing religion and having a religion choose you, is finding something that feels familiar. And in many ways that transcends race. I feel that we must face meritocracy within our own ranks so that we can truly learn to welcome others. To welcome is to care about someone, to care about someone's spiritual health, to live in a physical realm and not feel judged based on their own comfort levels. So I ask, where is curiosity? How do you get to know someone without asking stupid questions? This is a thing we have all experienced. I find that you have to, I see skin color as a great example of this, because people express prejudice because they have sight and they like to sort people into the caste system in our country. But to ignore that is, not to ignore, to fight against it, is the term "obey your instincts" from Susan Scott's Fierce Conversations, that book over there, the white one. Susan Scott says, she actually sorts throughout the book that we must obey our instincts, not just trust them, but obey them. She sorts thoughts into private thoughts, public thoughts, and a neutral zone. So when she's conducting a personal integrity scan, what she's really saying is, like, if your value feels conscientious, then ask an open-ended question and make sure it's really a welcoming question and not just something that is judgment that's been disguised or critique. I like to say, if you're going to be fierce, then you have to be saying it because I want to meet you. I want to meet you, which is why I'm asking an open-ended question. I want to meet you, which is why I'm saying hello, even though I don't recognize you. I think that is how we get past the caste system in our country, is if you truly believe that people are all equal, then you will go out of your way to say, I want to meet you, rather than just diving in or ignoring the person as a whole. I'd also like to cite Mariame Kaba's We Do This Till We Are Free, that book over there, the blue one. She writes in her 2015 prison culture essay that it's not that Black lives will matter to others within this country when we win the ordinance. Rather, it's that we who struggle together will have defined in part the vision of what we mean by Black Lives Mattering. She cites the great late Bell Hooks. It is essential to our struggle for self-determination that we speak of love, for love is the necessary foundation enabling us to survive wars, hardship, sickness, and the dying with our spirits intact. It's love that allows us to survive whole. I agree with Kaba that for Black people in this country, we cannot survive whole, yet love offers the opportunity to build sustaining and affirming communities that can help buffer against the relentless forces of oppression that seek our daily destruction. In other words, to lead with love gives us a fighting chance at winning. So let's actively engage conversation and ask who's around us. This to me is tikkun olam. We are looking to grab the orbs of light from around us and try to make the world whole. I've referenced earlier caste. Raise your hand if you don't know what caste means. Great, thank you. So caste focuses on the infrastructure of our divisions and rankings in our society, whereas race is the metric that's used to determine one's place in that. Caste is a term that's more precise, Wilkerson argues, than race. It's more comprehensive and it gets at the underlying infrastructure that we often cannot see. It's there undergirding much of the inequality and the injustices and disparities that we live in our country. I bring up caste because we as Jews know as an ethno-religion. We have a history of migrating across our world and having to develop subcultures. Here in America, while we worry and are haunted by hate crimes and disinvestment, there's also this counterculture of many modern day middle-class white Jews navigating the wider capitalist mindset. We established a sense of security, I would say World War II onwards, and from that sense of security has led to privilege and coding ourselves as separate from the rest of the community. So to recognize whatever and whomever that there is and everything else, if everyone else and everything else isn't us, then we're still upholding the term of caste. We have to, I would say, oh, that's a statement that someone made because it's insulting, or it's ignorant, or it just hurts. I think the reason for those statements is often because people are patronizing. We don't mean to be patronizing, but I think it's a uniquely Jewish perspective because we speak from on high. We are people of the book, right? So there's a logical framework in mind. I think many Jews come from a sense whenever they're dealt with some issue of race or cultural harm in our culture, the Jewish people all say, but I've dealt with something similar. I deal with anti-Semitism. That's an ethical appeal. When other people are not speaking of anti-Semitism and they're speaking of racism, of police brutality, of prison reform, of just feeling like outsiders, that sense of, but I'm Jewish, I know what this is like, is wrong. You haven't felt with what they're feeling. Don't presume that you have. Presume you haven't felt the way that they feel. I implore pathos instead. So I bring this up because I've discussed, I'm having a monologue. I've discussed a bit about the caste system, about that notion of intergenerational harm, and I've tried to connect it a bit with what we have been dealing with. As I think a culture over the last many years where many people don't know what to say, or they feel sort of blindsided by moments of misspeaking or feeling underheard or of wanting to be compassionate, wanting to be good allies. But those things often are hard to do when you yourself are coming from a place of meaning well, but not always doing well. I like to use to look at the commandment of loving thy neighbor. When you're in your neighbor's yard, that is, you are with them, you have to own their pain just like you would own your own pain. Do not solve their issue. Do not oralize and speak with them about what made that happen. Resist the desire to discuss with them why they're feeling the pain they're feeling. Don't tell them what they should do. You don't know. They do. The issue is that you have to sit with them. You have to welcome them. You have to implore them to share their interests with you. I like to note that in a synagogue, especially if you're looking at how do I get along with someone who looks like they are lonely or out of place, or you don't recognize them from the congregation, it's always helpful to ask what someone's favorite psalm is, to ask if they have a favorite figure from the Tanakh. It is Purim. I'd like to give a hand to all my Mordechai stands. I typically myself ask about art, music, sports, family, good neutral subjects that people can sort of ground themselves to and say, thank you for reaching out, trying to cross that other divide. I also recommend making a mental parking lot of a list of things that you like to discuss, but hold off, don't discuss it with them because you just met them. If you're thinking by now, Justin, you've said a lot, I'm a curmudgeon, I'm just here for the bagels. I'm here with you. My point is that when people feel othered, it's for a damn good, bad reason. Their experience is valid, and they do not care about whether you doubt them or whether you have compassion. They care that you exhibit capacity, that you exhibit love for them. My brother, I mentioned earlier, is a cantor. He wrote his thesis on, he's going to say it much cleaner than me, but on Black Jewishness and Zipporah, Moses' wife. He relates early in his thesis sort of the joy of empathy. I like to, so I've talked today a bit about caste and race, largely because I often deal with skepticism as a means of things that I ground myself in. For people of color, I would argue most people they ground themselves in skepticism because they don't come from a place of comfort and security. I like to sort of raise that up and say, I am here to be with you so that I can talk with you about the way you live, rather than what I can disregard from what makes me uncomfortable. I've spoken a bit about comfort today and about these appeals because compassion, I think, is what often drives Jews of color, especially, to look for welcome in places where they don't normally feel it, because they don't operate normally feeling welcome. That is one reason why people form all of their own communities and stick to their own communities. It's because of a fear of going outside. I've been speaking a bit about ostracization today and coming across as genuine. And I know I've sort of given you a bunch of recommendations about how to be a more compassionate person. But the biggest thing I would say is to please just be chill. Use jokes. Use jokes. Name a favorite Jewish comedian for me. Yell it out. I like Zero Mostel. That was fun. Lenny Bruce. Yes. That was the plan. Thank you. And Lenny, this is nasal, yes. So in his book, How to Talk Dirty and Influence People, which is the best title for a book, Lenny has a bit in the first few pages where he says, what he describes as culturally Jewish to him. He writes, "To me, if you live in New York or any other big city, you are Jewish. It doesn't even matter if you're Catholic. If you live in New York, you're Jewish. If you live in Butte, Montana, you're going to be Goyish, even if you're Jewish. Evaporated milk is Goyish, even if the Jews invented it. Chocolate is Jewish, and fudge is Goyish. Spam is Goyish, and rye bread is Jewish. Black people are all Jews. Italian people are all Jews. Irish people who have rejected their religion are all Jews. Mouths are very Jewish, and bosoms, but baton twirling is very Goyish." He goes on. My point is, your perspective and your delivery and your background is what makes you empathetic. And if you can't be humble and you can't take a joke, then how is someone going to feel comfortable with you? We as Jews carry with us history, like Lenny Bruce, comedy, art, things that help us cope, heal, and resonate. And we as Jews love to ruminate, yes? But what over? Many of you might know that I was honored to join the Jewish Museum of Maryland's board last year, where I served on an art exhibition called A Fence Around the Torah. A Fence Around the Torah.com. Their upcoming exhibition, Material Inheritance, continues my secret-centric desire for the museum to only do art gallery work rather than just historical heritage work. But I bring it up because I love exhibitions that shake me from my toes all the way up, because this upcoming exhibition, Material Inheritance, deals with heirlooms. I find often when you feel uncomfortable around someone, the easiest thing to do is ironically to talk about your own family and to ask them about theirs. I myself love family heirlooms. I brought a few, my great-grandmother's pocket wallet from which she used to have pictures in there. I brought my kindergarten photo album that my mom gave me when I was afraid to be alone. I myself very much hold on to my great-grandparents' marriage certificate, my grandparents' ketubah. Heirlooms are what allow us to connect with the past and with remembrance, longing, and nostalgia. I bring that up because I'd like for you to ponder on what thing do you wish that you had held on to from your childhood? What's been handed down to you in your family? What would you actually want to pass on after you pass away? If you can pass on values and a change of perspective, then that sets ground for hope in the next generation. This is an instinctively a Jewish value. My last source, maybe one or two, we'll see, is the folkloric tale of Soul Meets Body in the Jewish Sacred Moments book, the blue one there. I can see it. If you too brought a whole book of library items with you everywhere you went, you would know the covers. In that folkloric tale, Soul Meets Body, the authors write, just when the soul is ready to enter the body of the child to be born, the soul appears before God and implores God to be allowed to remain in heaven. The soul says, I am happy here, where I am holy and pure, and would rather not enter into that vile matter. God replies, you are being sent into the world, where it is better than where you have been dwelling. It is for that purpose that you were created. I ask, for what purpose were you created? What are we doing here if not to invigorate our neighbors, if not to hold ourselves to the beauty of this world? I implore you to think about grabbing a group of friends and going to Druid Hill Park and going to yell in the woods. Or you can enjoy the new pool and yell underwater. I like to note, I have one final passage and then I'll stop talking. Rabbi Telushkin writes in the Book of Jewish Values, look how late it is. Your candle is about to go out. Why are you still working? Says the rabbi. The shoemaker, undeterred by the rabbi's words, replies, As long as the candle is burning, it is still possible to mend. We must reconcile with those from whom we've become estranged. We must help make peace within our families. We must give charity and be a friend to those in financial straits. Through this, we work on learning to express our anger fairly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Take questions. And what I'm going to ask, because of our little audio setup today, that the sound is actually going to Zoom only through the computer. That if I'm going to give you the microphone to ask the question, if you can repeat the question. No, I've got a second one here. If you can repeat the question, Justin, so the people on Zoom can hear. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. I was interested that you come from correctional officers. And I come from a different place. But in my father's final illness, he had a roommate in the hospital. A black man who had taught high school and prison for many years. He was very adamant with me. He said, some of those guys are just no good. And you have to be able to recognize which ones. And said, unfortunately, too many of them are no good. So that really implanted in me. And I don't know if it's unfortunate or fortunate, but do you share that view at all? And some of the people in the correctional system are just no good.
Thank you. What's your name? David. So the question is, do you share the view that some people in our correctional facilities are just no good? Do I share that view? Yes, it is a prison. The question comes down to who is in our prisons and why. Prisons are disproportionately Black and people of color. We know that because of that, that dooms a whole group of disproportionately men too, but also women. It dooms a whole group of people, it dooms them to a world of hardship and of unfairly long sentences. I find that if our country wants to imprison a chunk of its population away, it's really just upholding slavery, because you're not giving people the right to earn their freedom. At that point, you're saying to them, it's been taken away, it shall always be taken away. And I think it's I think mandatory minimums and the harm of a desire for people to only be imprisoned in one way is very hard in our country, because other countries, some of, I'll just say like European countries, I've seen photos online where the prisons don't look like ours, because there are just different paths and different types of systems. I would argue that it's not okay just to say, well, if they're in prison, they must be horrible and doom them away. I think there should be more of an impassioned plea to release more people from prison and back into our society. It's a system. I understand that. There's an industry to it. There are reasons for why things happen the way they happen. But I can also say that if we spent as much on social work in our country as we do on the military, I think we'd have a healthier country.
Hi, Justin, Sally Scott. Thank you so much. It's a really interesting series of reflections. So I'm just curious, in your journey as a Jew, how you have found, or what you have found at Beth Am and your experience of the synagogue.
Thank you, Sally. The question was, in my experience as a Jew, what have I found value at Beth Am and at synagogue? First, I will say, since my parents passed away, I have reclaimed my feeling of belonging here. One of my favorite memories, I think this was before my Afraf with my husband, Rabbi Berg, you said to my mother, oh, your 3 sons are gay? You must be thrice blessed. And she looked at you with the eyes of like, no. I thought at least one of the 3 would end up giving me grandbabies. Still on the to-do list. I have found, for me, the first time I came into Beth Am was I think it was right before the High Holy Day services. A friend had invited me. He said, hey, this is a congregation that is very welcoming, has a lot of people who have pet projects, has a diverse group of people in age and race and background, and prides itself on that. It was through that lens that I found, the people sang well. That mattered a lot to me. So kudos for everyone for having good singing voices. The fact that we burst out into interviews from time to time at services with community speakers matters. I love the fact that our congregation grounds itself in being a touch old school and a whole lot of like new age. Like it gives me joy that there's a bit of that it's not leaning fully in like a sense of spiritual hoo-ha and grounds itself rather in like spiritual accountability. And I really just appreciate talks like this. So that's what I find of value here and why I'm still a member.
Justin, it's not an option. A follow-up question to that. You talked about how white Ashkenazi Jews can be patronizing sometimes to people of color. Would you and others in the room give us a sense of stupid things that we've said that we shouldn't have said, that we aren't going to say anymore?
Thank you, Howard. So the question was, for all the white Ashkenazi Jews in the room, would folks like to share stupid things you've said? I saw a follow-up hand. Okay.
Please go ahead.
This is a good round robin item. I think I'll just open it up rather than answer it myself. Esther, you had a gut reaction.
So this is understandable because there are like 1 billion Indians. I'm not Indian. My parents are Catholic. So if you have questions about the caste system, for example, I don't know anything about the caste system. Do not ask me anything about the caste system. I do not know. Do not ask me anything about Hinduism. I do not know. I am not Hindu. I'm not raised Hindu. I'm not Jewish. Catholic. Lots of statues, none of them Hindu. Just putting that out there. See if I have to bring that down.
I come from a very different background than Esther, but we're both very proudly converts. And for me, not in this congregation, but in the congregation that I was a part of when I had my children, one of my children is very blonde, very white, very pale skin, bright blue eyes. And the first time that I brought him to synagogue, 2 different people told me that he didn't look Jewish. And I think they meant it as a compliment because he looked so Aryan, for lack of a better way to say it. But it immediately, as a convert, made me feel very uncomfortable and also very conflicted in the reaction versus the reaction that I know my friends who are Black who have brought their children to synagogue have had which in some ways is identical and in some ways is very different.
Hmm.
There you go.
So I will try to recap for just an answer and a response.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. We're doing our.
Remind me again of your name?
Clara.
Clara spoke about having a newborn and having two ladies say that the baby looked rather blonde, blue-eyed, did not look Jewish to them, and how it made her uncomfortable. Those are good examples, Howard, of the value of seemingly meaning well commentary that doesn't help, and seeing or not seeing parallels in our system. My favorite examples of what I have heard other Jews of color deal with, depends on what their color is. Because, you know, if you are, depending on your ethnicity and what color of brown you came out as, it's gonna land differently. I've heard examples of being mistaken for service members at their congregation, you know, staff doing janitorial work or being there to turn the lights on for someone, things that are assumptions rather than questions. I remember how I mentioned earlier asking real questions that are open-ended and not critiques or something of that nature. It's really from that sense of comfort that we make assumptions. If you're not comfortable, then you're probably not going to say something. It's one of those double-edged swords. I myself will say, even though I grew up Jewish and went to a congregation since I was a baby, I always felt a bit out of place. Not because I was a Jew of color, although that was it. We were the only ones in the whole congregation. But because the congregation moved out to the outer edges of the county, and or to us, the outer edges. And that meant hardship, because not only does it go out to get somewhere, but everyone's points of reference are not yours. So I think often it deals with people making assumptions of you and not trying to ask you about, oh, what brought you here? I haven't met you before. Hi. That's usually the best way to open up a question to someone you don't know. I know lots of people's faces. Don't ask me anyone's names. But if I don't know your face, it's an opportunity to say, hey, what brought you here? A last question?
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
I had one. Yeah, I don't want to hog the microphone, but I did want to ask you, as someone who identifies in part as white and Jewish, whether you think that a la price of whiteness, that there is some sort of dialogue that should be happening in the Jewish community about separating Judaism from whiteness, whether the historical context of many Jews becoming identified as white within society is something that is or should be reversible, and if so, whether those of us who at least present as both white and Jewish have some sort of obligation or responsibility to talk more critically about our own racial identities than to simply identify as white.
Yes, thank you, Clara. Do white Jews have a responsibility and sort of a stake in disassociating from whiteness? I would respond with you all. So what is whiteness? It is usually the thing. It is the man. It is the white man's caste system. It is colonial vestiges in our culture. They're here. They're not going anywhere. To me, there's not a value in trying to disassociate other than to just point out that you're not WASPs and you, and that you're Jews and not Protestant, that you are, your families come from where your families come from, and you live the life you live. I would argue you have a responsibility to act for equity. You do not have a responsibility to ignore it. And I think often what the responsibility becomes is to engage, not disengage. And I will also just say it is a very, it's tough and sticky, because if everyone here said, oh, I don't want to be seen as white, I just want to be seen as Jewish, I can guarantee you the rest of white America would be coming around with the pitchforks again. So you're holding on to it because it gives you security. Even if you yourself don't identify as white, you think of yourself as a Jew first and foremost, race is stupid and none of us like it. So we live with it and we uphold our own values instead of it. Thank you all. I talked a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, everybody online, for hanging in there with a little different technology setup this week. And thank you, everyone who came in person. This has been an experiment for the Continuing Education Committee. We didn't know if people would show up at 8 o'clock on a Thursday. So thank you very much for being here. In 2 weeks, Rob Tyler will be talking with his take on justice. Rabbi Berg is going to be speaking. I think there's 3 more. I can't remember who the third one is, but everything, the whole list of everybody is online. Please take food to go or coffee to go if you would like. And thank you so much for being here. Thanks, everybody online. And thank you so much, Justin. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. I had the huge privilege of interviewing Justin and Dr. Harriet Wims and Rabbi Berg a couple of years ago for a podcast that was about community. And Justin, everyone spoke so beautifully and eloquently about community and about where we find community. And I'm going to send that link out when I send the link out to the video. So, okay. Thanks, everybody.